Next speaker this morning is Thom Langford, going to talk about an anatomy of a risk assessment for the next hour. Questions at the end, Tom?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we've got one more talk and then it's lunch. So without further ado, over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. So firstly, welcome to an anatomy of a risk assessment. And also, secondly, thank you very much. I know at least one of you must have voted for this talk. I know I did, and I don't know what the figures are, so I don't know how they tailed off towards the end. So, I'm hoping to meet the expectations of at least one of you. My key performance indicator, of course, is trying to reduce the percentage of people who actually walk out during the next 50 minutes or so. So, this is an anatomy of a risk assessment. It was originally titled, when I first came up with the idea, the anatomy of a risk assessment, but I kind of figured quite quickly that risk assessments are very much unique. There is no such thing as a definitive risk assessment, and especially when we throw in other terms as well, like audit, which we'll come on later. There's a vast range of things that we can do, and we focus it down into security as well. We get we're kind of throwing it open even more, within the ranges of what we do within security. But as you probably gathered from the theme and anatomy, we're going to be talking about a range of body parts today, starting with the cadaver and working all the way down to the final evisceration of the body itself. And the reason for this is I'm trying to put across a human social element here. I'm trying to give you some tools from my experience and experience of my peers and colleagues, and almost a mnemonic of how you can use everything that's available to you. You're born with it. Depending upon whatever deity or non-deity you believe in, you've been granted, these many things that are listed here, and how you can use them more effectively in a risk assessment. It's pretty graphical. If you are of a nervous disposition, and judging by the size of this bloody screen, these pictures are going to look pretty gruesome in some cases. So, just kind of fade out the one side if it's a little bit excessive. Now, how many other presentations are going to show you a slow-mo pause of a body exploding in front of another body? Not many. That's pretty much the highlight of it. But again, this is analogous to the anatomy of a person, and like every good talk like this, you come up with the title first, and then you kind of wedge everything else in after that, right? And so I had the idea, anatomy of a risk assessment. That works, and I came up with a few topics. So you'll see that in maybe one or two cases, I've stretched that analogy a little bit. But bear with me, I'll point it out so it's not too disappointing when you do come across it. This is not heavily technical, okay? This is not a checklist. This is not, compliance by the numbers or the 10 deficiencies in cloud computing that you need to look out for or anything like that. This is the human social element. This is how you interact with people over the table when you're carrying out a risk assessment. It draws on experiences from both sides of the table, so as both an assessor and an assessee. And I will, I'll try and give as many examples as I can. And those examples, I bring up these examples based on my experience, not to show how widely traveled I am and how awesome I am at these sort of things, but to bring color to these things, because that's what's important. If you don't have real world examples on which you can pin these things onto, it's very difficult to actually to put into practice some of these techniques, if I may. It also brings in about various geographic and cultural differences as well. And so, in a quick show of hands, is there anybody here who works across multiple geographies? Hands up, anyone? So quite a few. That's great. So you probably already know that there's a huge amount of cultural differences between the English, the Germans, the Americans, the Indians, etc. Especially when you travel there. And so you can't rely purely upon your own, as it were, insular view of the world when you are talking, and assessing projects or teams or clients within those locations. It may come across as cynical in some cases, of some of the things I'm saying, trying to trick people and trip them up. It's not meant to be. It's probably based upon the fact that I'm kind of a poacher turned gamekeeper in certain aspects. So I try and, if I'm trying to trip someone up, as it were, it's because I know that these things happen in the real world. Another question: hands up who actually carries out risk assessments themselves. Fantastic. Well, it's a perfect audience in that case, which is good news. And who has risk assessments carried out upon them? Okay. Oh, no, that's good. We've got a few hands up there. Okay, that's fine. That's good. And when we throw that in across multiple geographies, we've got an awful lot of, iterations and interactions that go on. And finally, possibly the unspoken word audit. The difference between an assessment and an audit. And I will tell you that I will use the term interchangeably. But just to be clear, an audit is against a given standard. It's virtually a tick box, yes, no, pass, fail. A little bit of grey area. I think with ISO 27001 their lexicon is area of concern. But ultimately, you are being measured against something. Whereas a risk assessment is something altogether more subjective and a little bit more difficult to pin down. And we'll talk about some of those aspects of what we do there. But bear with me, I will use them interchangeably, basically because having been on both sides of the table on both assessments and audits, those experiences kind of blend somewhat. So we're going to start with the feet. I did think about having this as the skeleton, as the spine, because I thought, the point of this slide is, what is the foundation of what it is that we're trying to do in a risk assessment? What it is that we are trying to achieve by carrying out the assessment. But I did find this picture, and I kind of preferred this one to just a white spine on a white background. But the principle remains the same. Your feet are, they allow you to get from A to B. They allow you to achieve your goal of carrying out your risk assessment. If you don't understand what your goals are before you even go in there, you're going to start uncovering, the wrong skeletons, effectively, or in even worse cases, perhaps even no skeletons. So my background, funnily enough, is from a security perspective, and I'm sure most of you are. But are there any people here that carry out assessments from a different perspective, from purely security? So yes, sir. TSCM. Okay, yep. Other ones? So I'm thinking of, oh, sorry, yes.
I once did a fire risk assessment.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. That's fair play. Yes.
In my previous role, as a line manager, so you're expected to do those kind of risk management stuff on any activity you're doing, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing. So.
Yeah. And just to broaden this out again, we've got financial risks that we need to look at, or that people will look at. We might also have legislative risks that need to be assessed, or market risks, for instance, or perhaps crisis-style risks, earthquakes occurring in certain geographies and things like that. So again, understanding your perspective. Obviously, I think from the overwhelming response there, we're probably all from a security risk perspective here. But I think it's important to understand that difference. So I have colleagues in Boston who are part of the Sarbanes-Oxley team, the SOX team. And Sarbanes-Oxley, very quickly came out as a result of the Enron scandal, and looks at the financial viability and the financial stability of a company, and certain risks are analysed through that. To paraphrase it very, very dramatically, when they go in and carry out an assessment of a team, for instance, say for instance like the payroll team, they're looking at the financial risks. So they're interested in, for instance, if within the expenses system, are expenses being signed off by the right people in the right process in the right time and all that sort of thing. That's anathema to me as a security risk assessment. I could go in and assess the payroll team and see the door propped open with a fire extinguisher. That's a security risk as people come in. We might go in looking at the same team and come out with two entirely different set of risks. And I think that's something that's worthwhile bearing in mind when you go into it, ensuring you know what is your universe that you're covering. Secondly, or thirdly, I should say, what tools do we use? What is your baseline? If you're doing an audit, say an ISO audit, it's fairly straightforward, right? ISO 27001 standard, you've got a list of requirements, you tick across them, very straightforward. If it's an assessment as such, look at different standards, Risk IT, for instance, or Octave, or different, anything. Could be your own internal standard as well. But you've got to have something that you can leverage, something you can come back to. And they're different standards and different approaches are favoured by different industries. So, many clients of ours, for instance, will come to us and say, show us your PCI compliance. Well, we're not PCI compliant. We don't handle credit card details. But that's what they understand. That's what they know and understand. So when you go, if you're looking at a given team or a client or whatever, make sure you understand what their background is, and you can start to at least pick out some of these risks in a language that they're going to understand in the first place. And when you find the risks, how are you going to measure them? For me, I like ISO 27001. It kind of reflects me, simple and straightforward. It's very simple to understand. It's very easy to put across to the layperson how you have measured a risk. Asset value, likelihood, impact, and a score. And you can measure everything across that. And I like ISO 27005 because I can apply a security risk assessment on a laptop, or a project, or a team, or a facility throughout the whole lot. And I can still apply the same measures to it. I'm comparing apples to apples across the board. A colleague of mine uses Risk IT for business continuity planning risks, as it were, and he then translates those into 27005 scoring. But the actual Risk IT format for him works better in how he's working his BCMS, his business continuity management system. Yeah, so you do need to make sure that you're using the right tool for the job, but ultimately, in your final analysis, the risks have to be able to stand side by side with each other, so that when there's an 8, it really means it's serious, and when it's a 3, that actually you can probably leave that till a lot later. Be it a laptop or a facility or a service or a process or anything like that. Move on to the brain. So use your brain. Plan the assessment. That's where this is coming from. Plan the assessment. Don't just turn up on the day and hope to get away with it. Give notice to the people that you are assessing. Not too much notice. The element of surprise is a useful tool in of itself. And by surprise, I don't mean pitching up at the door and saying, come on, time to do the assessment now. That's going to earn you no favours. And if you're doing an internal assessment or an internal audit of a team, you can probably get away with less notice. Maybe a couple of days or a week, dependent upon your remit from senior management. If you're an external auditor, an external assessor, you're probably bound by a certain criteria that you have to give at least 2 to 3 weeks notice, dependent upon the company you work for, dependent upon the assessment that you're carrying out. But nonetheless, make sure you plan for it in advance. It sounds dumb, but a number of these things done last minute are just prone to failure from the outset. The thing that often comes back, I've found, over the number of years, is this misunderstanding of what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. The question, great, yes, really looking forward to the assessment. Let me know what you want to see and I'll make sure it's all prepared for you. Well, that's kind of not the point of an assessment. The point is for me to come in, do a sampling exercise, ask you the questions and get you to then show me all of the information that I need. If I tell you what I want, you'll busily, over the next 2 weeks, you'll go off and start typing it all up for me, and it'll all be perfect. Absolute waste of time. And conversely, from the other side of the table, it's always a mistake to try and prepare to pass an audit per se. That doesn't mean you shouldn't, put the work in, but don't think there's an audit in 6 months' time and then a month before just work furiously to pass it. You may get away with it a couple of 3 times, at best, but at some point, the wheels are going to come off it. At some point, somebody's going to be held accountable for why, compliance or the risk profile is low at the round about the time of the assessment, and then shoots up afterwards and something goes wrong, your senior management are going to be held accountable for that, and that arse kicking is going to very quickly reach its way down to you. Try and ensure that at all times you're ready for an audit. Technically, you should be ready for somebody to come in on no notice. That's my first point. That's neither polite, professional, or really very helpful. But that's the point of readiness that you need to be at all time. Otherwise, it's not a part of your DNA. You are actually not achieving the goals of what it is that you set out to do in the first place. As an assessor, look at the players involved. So you set the schedule. Now you need to look at the people who are involved. Why is it important? Well, finding out who they are, look up on, if it's internal, look on the company directory, find out where they are in the structure, find out how old they are, well, not how old they are, how long they've been in the organisation, I should say. It might be they've been in there for 15 years and they've got very, stuck in the mud ways of doing things. Nothing wrong with that per se, but you need to be prepared for it. Or it might be that it's an entirely new team. They've been recruited all in the last year. The manager came in 2 months ago because the previous manager was off with stress. That's going to tell you something about the assessment in the first place. If it's external, social networking, LinkedIn, all that sort of stuff, you can find out exactly the same kind of information. You can gather a lot of information. It's important to find this out because it allows you to talk to these people in a language that they know and understand. So try and plan not only for the assessment itself, but for the people that you're expecting to meet when you get there. Goes without saying, produce your artifacts in advance. If you've got a sign-in sheet, for instance, if you use one of those, get it produced in advance. If you've got an evidence record sheet, get it produced in advance. If you're asking for pieces of A4 and scribbling things down on pieces of paper and passing it around, you're already, again, you're off on a sort of a poor footing with the assessees. Who is this guy? He's not professional. He doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't even got his papers ready. Yeah, so just get all that sort of stuff prepared in advance as well. And finally, know what it is that you are actually going to be asking the questions on. I carry out a lot of assessments on a wide variety of industry areas. So for instance, I might look at a particularly technically heavy project or team or environment. I need to know the technologies that are in use, so I can just do a little bit of brushing up beforehand, so I can, again, talk their language. I can ask the right things. It might be a heavily creative environment, in which case the use of technology is going to be somewhat limited to, Dropbox and Photoshop, if you'll forgive my paraphrase there. But that's, you have to understand where it is that you're going to focus and the technology that you're going to come across when you get there. So we come to the eyes, and believe it or not, you use your eyes to look at things. And this is my favorite part, because the observation side of things is one of the, dare I say, funnest parts of things. Don't you hate it when things are fun? Hey, it's fun. But it starts from the moment you step out of the cab. As you walk in up to the building, you should be looking at the building that you're going to be assessing. I can't tell you how many times I see CCTV cameras on corners of buildings pointing away from each other, right? Looking down both sides of the wall, leaving a huge arc of blank space that people can walk up to and inside along the building. You'd be amazed. Just look through London. Walking here from Spitalfields, for instance, there's one building that does very similar things. 2 cameras pointing away at each other, down 2 sides. They should be focused that they're covering each other as well. Observe as you get signed in, or even if you do get signed in, walking into the reception. How attentive are the security staff or the reception staff? Are they expecting you? If they're not expecting you, chances are that their sign-in process is probably a little bit deficient as well. Always ask to go to the toilet when you're in the reception, because you get to see more of the building that way, right? And again, as an example for you, I do recall lovely looking reception, false wall, reception desk, beautiful, can I use your toilet? Yes, it's just behind here, out of sight. As I walked round behind the wall, the toilets were there, And just there was a secure area door propped open with a fire extinguisher, right? Now, to be blunt, if I hadn't needed the toilet, I wouldn't have found that out. But that's the sort of thing, because they are looking outwards from the building. They're not actually concerned about what's going on right behind their backs. You know, so do take a look around. You know, I wandered in there, had a quick walk up and down the corridor and came straight back out. You know, I wasn't doing a social engineering experiment. I was here to carry out an assessment, and that was, you know, immediately written down. The other thing, you know, about observation is, you know, when you are in the assessment yourself, look at the people. Look at who they look at. Yeah. Try observe if there are any long pauses after questions, and find out who is doing all of the answering as well. So if you ask a question to this person and this person is constantly answering the questions, is it because why is this person even here? You know, if they're supposed to be a part of this assessment, that's because they have a valid perspective to bring. The person who's doing the answering of all the questions may be the senior guy in the team, you know, the grey hair or no hair, who's actually been there for a while, and actually knows everything and is damn well going to make sure we get through this assessment, you know, and can, you know, try and barge his way through it. So observe how people interact with each other. You know, and in different cultures, this works in, you know, in different ways as well. You know, so in certain cultures, you know, junior staff are more subservient to senior staff than, say, in UK cultures. You know, so that you get different kind of signals in different cultures as well. We're going to talk about the walkabout later as well, where we also talk about observations. But the other part of this is, if you're the auditee, never let the auditor out of your sight, because that's the time when mischief happens, right? Because they will also go looking around for things. Escort them to the bathroom. You know, escort them as you do a walkabout. When you've finished the assessment, escort them all the way down and see them off the premises, basically. A couple of things, you know, a couple of experiences here. I recall as we were walking out as well, you know, engaging the chap in conversation. Oh, thank goodness he didn't talk about disaster recovery. Let's go. Let's go back and talk about disaster recovery, shall we? You know, because if I'd just been, yeah, it's fine, see my way out, you actually might not get that, you know, get people off their guard, as it were. This is the cynical part coming in. The other part as well is, I was in India, it was August, it was 44 degrees centigrade, and the guy's cab was late, and we found out after we'd walked off the premises and we were stood by, you know, where the cars pull up, 40 minutes. But I was taking a shower inside my clothes, but there was no way I was going to say, thanks, Girish, we'll see you later. He was staying in my sight until he had gone, simple as that. You know, so it's worth doing, because as soon as they're out of your sight, unless they're off your premises and gone, they're out of your control as well. So, ears. So observation is important. Listening is also important. In my top two, this is number one as well as the other one. Listen to every single statement that's made to you after every question you give. Pick it apart, repeat it back, listen to that, listen to what they respond to, and then confirm it back again. Why? Because you're trying to get the maximum out of the minimum that they want to give you. And again, this is the cynic in me coming out. As an auditee, the less I say, the less I can be, you know, held to ransom for it or held accountable for it. Well, in which case, I'm going to pick up on every single cue, you know, verbal, you know, oral, body language, etc. Again, all things that we look at later. I want to pull everything out of you as much as possible. Yeah, so just bear in mind the maximum out of the minimum that's going to be given to you. I know, because I used to do it all the time. You know, I do not want them to know about this particular document. Do you have a testing document? You know, have you carried out a test? Yes. You know, and it's so on, right? So you've got to get more and more out of them. Use your ears in another way as well. So a good friend of mine, a couple of years ago, he went on a counsellor's course, you know, talking to people who feel stressed and all that sort of thing. It's very in-depth, fascinating talking to him about it. And he told me they spent a good couple of sessions learning about the value of silence and how you can use it to elicit more information. So when I ask a question, someone responds, and they finish, don't immediately jump back in, wait. Nature abhors a vacuum, human beings abhor a silence. They want to kind of fill it, right? They don't want to be awkward about it. And in many cases, they also don't want to be rude. You know, right, that's it, next question, move on. You know, it's not their game to play, as it were. Let them do it. You know, so there's a quote in a book, the Leader's Workbook, which I really liked, which is, you're blessed with, you know, twice as many ears as you are mouths. Right? Use that kind of ratio. Listen at least twice as much as you talk. And that listening means also listening to silence, waiting for them to fill the gaps. While you're waiting for that silence, or whilst you're waiting for that silence, maintain eye contact as well. Because if you look down and start scribbling away or looking away, they think the conversation is over. While you're still looking at them, you're maintaining that contact. And if they're breaking that eye contact first, chances are they're probably missing something out, or they want to say something else. That may be the point in which you can ask further questions. Listen to the subtext as well. In many cases, you know, people do not like being assessed, or they don't like being audited. It's a very personal feeling. Even though in many cases, the reason why they might not be doing so well is entirely out of their hands. It's due to, poor resourcing and not enough money and not the wrong skills and all that sort of thing. Listen to the subtext that's coming through and turn what might be coming across as hostile into a more positive conversation. You know, make sure that you understand when they're talking about the challenges that they face. You understand their poor scope, their poor stakeholder management. Let them know that what you're doing is effectively some kind of consultancy for them, in effect, right? They could use this report as leverage to get better resources, to get, you know, better training and more money and, you know, anything else that they might need if it's used properly. Basically, try and sit on their side of the story. Try and see it from their side. Empathize with them. You know, resell, as I said, resell the risk assessment as something as free consultancy. You can turn that around and start giving them advice on how they can improve things as well. Okay, you don't have budget. You know, your risk table, your table of risks sucks. Here's why it sucks, and this is what you've got to do about it. And actually, if you do it right, it's really simple. Watch them furiously scribble notes. You'll see that actually they want this stuff because they want to be able to do better in this, certainly the next time. And I think, you know, in summary on this, it's all about you find out more by listening more. It sounds obvious, but it's very easy to get carried away in the activities of a risk assessment. You know, very easy to just plow through all the points to be covered, or plow through, you know, your agenda, as it were. So try to do more to listen as much as possible. So the mouth. I couldn't help noticing the huge fish hook in the top of this guy's mouth, which is a little disturbing. I won't tell you which site I got that one from on Google. When you're not trying to get them to fill an awkward silence, and this is where we find the fine balance between all of these activities, talk to them. Ask them stupid questions. You know, there's no such thing as a stupid question in a concept like, you know, in a concept such as a risk assessment or an audit. They are the subject matter experts across, you know, much of this field, you know, between them. Find out more about what it is they know and therefore what it is they don't know. Prove to them that you're not just a box ticker there in a white coat and a clipboard going, do you do this? Yes, tick. Do you do that? No, cross, etc. Try and engage with them more. You know, talk with them as equals, not as auditee and auditor as much as possible. If you happen to have lunch, and lunch with audits is fabulous depending on which side of the table. As an auditee, you try and schedule the longest lunch in the furthest restaurant away from the office, you know, and try and use up those hours. First thing you do as an auditor is, I think we should just have sandwiches and have a working lunch. You know, which, oh, bugger. But use that time, that downtime, be it in the the restaurant miles away. It might suit your purposes, dependent upon how you're going on. Use that time to talk to them. Talk to them again about their pain points. Talk to them about their goals outside of necessarily this risk assessment. How about for, if not this sub-team, then how about the team as a whole, or not this particular office, but the company as a whole? Try and see where they're going as a larger organisation. Find out about their hobbies, for goodness sake, because it might be that you share a love of philately or fly fishing or anything else beginning with f. Because that then immediately identifies you as a human being to them, not just some box-ticking ogre who's here to make their life a misery. You start to create a bond with those people, and they will start to open up a little bit more. And especially if you go back to these places time and time again, you will build up an ongoing relationship with them. I know we had an auditor, it was an ISO 27001 auditor in India. He came to us about 7 or 8 times, I think, in total. And half the time was spent chatting. So as an auditee, it was great. We're using up these hours that we need to do just because he wants to chat and find out what's going on. Of course, what he was doing was trying to ensure whether or not security was inherent in the company as a whole. Right? Not just within the specific areas that we were covered within our scope. He wanted to see the bigger picture, and that was what he was doing. So we kind of met both our goals at the end of the day. But we didn't do that, or we wouldn't have done that, if we hadn't trusted each other and understood that we were working towards those same goals. Again, I mentioned before about who you're talking to and who's doing the answering. Speak to everybody. Focus direct questions on individuals. And if the baldy guy on the left-hand side starts to answer everything all over again, say, no, I just want to hear from this perspective. It's entirely valid to try and, elicit a question from somebody who, should know something but is not necessarily volunteering it. You're trying to ascertain the breadth and depth of that person's knowledge after all. If that one person has all the answers, the warning bells should be ringing out across the board. And the other thing as well is, I mentioned earlier about understand what the project is. Is it technically heavy? Is it creatively heavy or whatever? Identify the individuals within that assessment for what it is that they do. Who's the techie? Who's the coder? Who's the creative genius? And that means that you can bypass, when you've come to those certain questions or those assumptions that you need to validate, you bypass the guy who knows everything because you're talking directly to the individual who really should know, the SME in this case. So understand who does what in each environment. So the no's. I like this one because it brings out the detective in everybody, really. Follow your nose at the end of the day. When you come across an environment and there is fabulous documentation and it's pristine and it's beautifully rendered and it's nice logos and all of the sign-off dates are correct and you've got a perfect evidence trail of who approved what and when and the change control is in there, etc., and all the procedures mapped directly and references interconnect and all that sort of thing, that's going to give you a fairly good impression of what it is that you're assessing. Chances are, if they take the time and effort to produce quality documentation, it's because they care about the processes and the policies and the implementation of what they're doing underneath it. On the obverse of this, of course, is if they bring the documentation in a Tesco's bag and slap it down and it's stapled together and dog-eared and, oh yeah, we haven't quite updated that one yet. I know it's a month out, but we're in the process of it, etc. Chances are they don't care about the processes themselves. They think it's all up here. It's all tribal knowledge. It's fine. We can do it. We can make this work for us. So nothing's really that clear-cut, very rarely. But you need to try and pick up some of these clues that will tell you more about the organisation that you're reviewing. So follow your nose. If something doesn't quite add up, if a reference is slightly incorrect, or if a piece of evidence doesn't quite add up, follow it through. There's no question about it. Keep plugging away. Keep asking the stupid questions. You know, in one, I had an 8-hour assessment to carry out, and in one of them I spent nearly 3 hours on the second question of God knows how many, because this really does not add up. You know, this, and this. It's not quite adding up. We need to follow through. About 2.5 hours through, I started to sweat a bit, you know. I might have made a mistake here. I might have, you know, come across nothing at the expense of about 20 other risks that we could have uncovered here, you know, 20 other more important risks. You know, it did work out in the end, thank goodness, but you know, you do need to follow your nose on this. Follow the evidence trail, you know, until you find something, or until you're satisfied that actually there really is nothing there. Okay, that sharp pinging noise you're hearing is the analogy of an anatomy being stretched to breaking point, flying over your head there, to paraphrase Douglas Adams. Lungs, the reason I chose your lungs here is sometimes you've really got to breathe a little bit in an audit, right? You've got to take a deep breath, in and out, tell yourself you're warm and you're calm and you're on your special beach somewhere, because, you know, there are occasions where you're just butting heads. Yeah, things are not happening. You're asking for stuff and it's not being delivered, but they don't think it should be delivered. You know, you're requesting documentation. They said, oh, it's in our other facility. It'll be here in 2 or 3 hours. You know, while you full well know that somebody's probably typing the damn thing up in the background. You know, you really need to kind of take a step back from all this and say, right, what is it that we are trying to achieve here? Let's reset, pace the rest of the day. You know, and basically try and re-engage with people. Let's, you know, reset to 0 and start again. There's a variety of reasons, which you've already talked about, the pressures on the on the auditees, for instance, or maybe you haven't done your homework and you've miscalculated who it is that you're talking to, for instance, and you're missing the actual core role or the core perspective of what that team is trying to do. You know, so if you're getting nowhere, reset those expectations, think it through again, try and understand where it's going. The flip side to this is try and always understand the difference between time wasting and things just taking a long time to get. You know, perhaps the records department is on the other side of town and it is raining and there are no cabs and, you know, well, perhaps you should have asked for all that documentation in the first place anyway, right? You know, next time, make sure you have the meeting at the records department. You know, but understand when it's time wasting and try and dragging feet versus actual issues. Try and do as many things in parallel as possible. Get me these records. It's going to take 2 hours. Okay, go get them. We'll move on to the next thing. Far easier when you've got 2 people doing it because you can track multiple activities more than, you know, at once, far more easily. And if you're doing assessing against a standard, for instance, ISO 27001, they work against headcount and therefore the number of hours that you should have, you know, to be assessed. Don't count downtime or null time towards that. If you're literally at the end of the day still waiting for the records, the clock stops, right? It's just like a game of rugby. When you know, the clock stops when they're pulling the half-dead player off and throwing the other player on, and then you carry on. And of course, you should never have a long lunch, you know, because that stops the clock as well. So the hands, getting your hands dirty, actually getting in and reviewing documents. And this is where, in a lot of cases, cultural differences, you know, play a big part. So if I carry out risk assessments against American clients, for instance, it's almost always electronic documentation on a screen. Here you go, boom, scroll through, work your way out. If I go to India, it's almost always paper documentation. You know, it's a very bureaucratic environment. You know, they can thank us, the empire, for that. Very bureaucratic, very paper-based, and that's how it works. And it works, there's no question about it. The downside, of course, is you will get reams of paper. So we carried out an assessment on a facilities management team. And I don't know anybody who's worked in India here, but good companies out in India will arrange or manage transport for their employees from home to the office and back. It's like a perk, it's like health insurance, right, over here. It's what's expected. So I know from, my company in India, we've got about 4,000 people out of one site. We transport 2,500 people per day to and from the office. A total of 5,000 trips, as it were. So this is a big operation. It takes up a lot of time. Obviously, lots of out of hours, lots of single people or individuals going home at odd hours. We obviously insist on background checks on all of our cab drivers. Now, the best part of this is within India, with the infrastructure in India, and lots of disparate villages, no central criminal database or anything like that. So background checks are carried out by individual villages or towns and the chief of police. And basically, the police look through their records. No, can't find his name, therefore he's got a clean, criminal record check. We were looking through the cab company's records, photos, name, address, all that sort of thing, and a stamp from the police that said this person has a clear criminal check. Okay, there's a lot of drivers from this particular village because they've all got the stamp from the same village and the same chief of police on it. But fair enough, companies start up in a village and will extend their services and they'll recruit in that village and no problems at all. While somebody was looking through that, we then looked through some of the contracts for the cab companies. It turns out that the chief of police in this village was also one of the main cab vendors. He owned the cab company. And it didn't matter who walked in his door, he was just stamping it, taking it to his office and stamping their background check just to get it through. So you have to go through the reams and reams of paper to work out these kinds of things. Okay? They're kind of staring you in the face. But just flicking through a sample of 2 or 3 is not really enough, especially when you've got paper records this deep. I mentioned earlier about Walkabout. This is the bit I love because it satisfies the voyeur in me. And I can go around and look through everybody's stuff. Walkabout, walk through the office. You're talking to people on the shop floor, as it were. You're asking them about their awareness. Do they lock their laptops up and all that sort of thing. Sit down in an empty desk. Somebody's either on holiday or at lunch or something. Check the drawers, wiggle the drawers. See if the laptop's locked down or secured or whatever. You'd be amazed. Sitting at desks, for instance, where team members have left a few days before and they're waiting for new team members to join. You open the drawers and there's effectively confidential information left in those drawers. They've deleted the computer, they've done the IT security, but nobody's thought to go through and empty all the crap out of the pedestal. They leave that for the next person. Are these documents really suitable for the eyes of the new person who's joining? It could be that it was a director who had moved off and a very junior associate is coming in. Are these even basically salary information, for instance? We don't know. That's the point, to have a route around. Get your camera phone out. That always gets things done. The moment you start taking pictures of something, rather than just writing something down, the act of taking a picture seems to get a huge flurry of activity to get stuff done. What are you doing? I'm taking a picture. It's not locked. It should be locked. It'll all be in the report. You'll see it soon. Guaranteed, 20 minutes later, everything's locked down. The word has gone round. They've seen you there walking around, not with your clipboard, but with your camera, taking pictures of their environment. They want to know why. So I think, by merely bringing your presence onto the floor as well, rather than just sitting in the office, actually trying to engage with people, looking through things, sticking your nose or your hands, I should say, hands where, people might not expect they belong, is a very useful tool for ensuring that you can find stuff out. So without wishing to compare your nose to your gut or your intestine, this is very similar to finding something with your nose. But it starts in a different place. So with your nose, you kind of smelt something. Something's wrong. This doesn't add up here, that doesn't add up there. In the spirit of all good cop shows, I got a gut feeling on this lieutenant. He's going on nothing, right? And that's what this is. This is actually, you've got no evidence to tell you that X, Y, or Z is wrong. It really just doesn't feel right as it is, And, you should follow it through. It's a careful one. It's a careful balance to have. You do need to think about, this, not necessarily that this will backfire, but you could waste time, right? And there's nothing wrong in asking questions in the face of good evidence if it doesn't feel right. You know, it might be that you've, you know, assessed this team before, or a team that's, you know, adjacent to them or something, and they're doing two entirely different things. You know, this team is doing very badly, but according to the evidence, this team is doing very well, and that just doesn't fit right. You need to think about why that doesn't fit right and follow through. So just because there's good evidence doesn't mean you should stop if it feels the right thing to do. Keep trusting them, but also know when to stop. Because you don't want to take time away from finding other, perhaps more important risks, especially on a gut feel. Now, a good example of this, it was a bit of a you know, a eureka moment for me, was assessing an office. We had an offshore delivery center for this particular client, and you know, you walk into a secure office, and we then have a second set of security for this particular project area. Dual factor authentication rather than just, you know, key badging in. And things were going well, you know, expected risks here and there, and I stood outside. You always observe people going in and out because you don't want people to tailgate and all that sort of thing. And people walking in, I thought, no, this isn't right. I can't believe this is this perfect. People tabbing, doing their 4-digit code. Doesn't feel right. So I asked for somebody's card, you know, took it off, inspected it, and it was a HID card, you know, standard access card. And it's got a series of numbers on the back. I think it's a 6-digit number in this case, you know, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What was happening was that the facilities team knew that this was a dual factor authentication place. They had to issue a card and a PIN number. So they were issuing the last 4 digits of the 6-digit number on the card. So your dual factor has suddenly become single factor. And, well, hang on a minute. So we tried that 3 or 4 times. Actually, everybody who walked through took their ID badge, typed the number in, the door opened. That was based on nothing apart from the very cynical thoughts that, nah, it's not this perfect. You know, so the gut feel does work, you know, on occasion. You know, not as reliable as the nose, but always worth following up. All right. This is where I win a £5 bet from someone in the audience. You know who you are, because I managed to get an arsehole into my presentation. Not in front of my presentation, on the presentation. So this is what it is. If it smells like it's bullshit, then it really probably is bullshit, and you need to follow up on it. And this is different to people being over-specific in their responses. Yes, we have a disaster recovery test carried out every year. You know, this is more than that. This is saying that when they actually quite blatantly don't. It could be verbal. It could be falsified evidence, you know, or it could be evidence that is easily falsifiable, for instance. So a text printout of email chains, you know, with, yes, I approve this document on this date, blah, blah, blah. You know, you need to look out for stuff that is blatantly not true or not supportable. The other thing as well, the exchanging of looks between people. You know, when you ask a question, it's like, yes, we do that. You know, that's going to tell you something that's not the whole truth that you're listening to. The other thing here is body language as well. You know, the neuro-linguistic programming says that if you're right-handed, and if you're asked to recount something and you look up and to your right, you are visually reconstructing the images. Visually constructing the images, which basically means that you're lying, you're making it up. And if you're looking up and to the left as you recount something, you're basically drawing that down from memory. Now, how real that is and how efficient that is and how, you know, accurate that is, you know, I leave to individual folks, because, you know, we all have our own, you know, thoughts about NLP and things like that. I think there's a certain, you know, element of truth in it, and when you combine it with other factors, I think it's worth bearing in mind. And the other thing as well is the changing of body position, you know, turning slightly away, covering the body, things like that. You're creating a defensive position. I want you to stop. I'm shielding myself away from your questions, is another, you know, kind of indicator. Anybody who's eager to follow a change of topic, you know, right, let's move on to incident management. Yes, let's. I think that's a really good idea. Fabulous, excellent. They're doing that because they're leaving dangerous ground to safe ground, right? Or even if they're on the defensive a lot rather than on the offensive, if you will. So if someone is very defensive about what they do, it's because they're struggling to construct a feasible and viable argument, on this, on the move, as it were. Whereas if they're on the offensive, people often feel more aggressive, more confident in what it is that they're saying. That doesn't mean, again, as an individual indicator, it's not black or white, but these are all things that we can look for. So always focus on the evidence, but pick up visual cues from other places as well. So we come to the last slide, the evisceration. I read a book recently that was talking about morgues and bodies and things like that. And an evisceration apparently is when they slice you from the chin down the throat all the way down to your pubic bone here, open you up, break the ribs, and then all of your internal organs come out in one go. Literally, because it's basically one long pipe effectively, right? Take all out in one go, and it's called a pluck, which I thought was a fascinating term. There's nothing to do with this, I thought I would just tell you. So when you get to the end of it, because obviously in an evisceration, you don't put everything back and let set everybody on their way, really, do you? At the end of the day, there's three things, in my opinion, that a risk assessment or an audit need to be. And the first one is that it should be collaborative, educational, open, non-confrontational, non-judgmental, and constructive. If you fit all of those things into your assessment, and you're going to come out with a positive experience. That's from both sides of the fence here. The second thing is understand your role as an actor in the play that you're about to embark on, right? And the reason I say that is, it could be that as an assessor or as an auditor, your role is as a mentor almost. You're there to ask the questions, get the responses, measure their risk, and then help them out. Any auditee or anybody on the other side of the table can learn a vast amount from people who do this sort of thing for a living, if you will. And so it could be that that's part of your role. It could also be that if you try and play that role with everybody, you're just going to, patronise and offend, certain people. Other organisations, perhaps very much more mature in these spaces, they're going to take that the wrong way. Don't patronise us. Don't tell us how to do this. Just mark the goddamn, risk assessment and tell me it's right. So understand the role that you're going to play in it. And finally, how can you, as an assessor or an assessee, improve without feedback? The end of every single assessment, you need to exchange, constructive, open and honest feedback. Tell each other what worked and what didn't work. It's a painful experience at times, there's no question about that. But you can learn. It doesn't matter, how many grey hairs that you've got, as an auditor. You can still learn from people as to what expectations were. Perhaps you did something wrong. You get very blasé about how you do things. So as a closing question here, I think that's a very quick one. I'm going to ask all of you, who at the end of an assessment, all of you put your hand up at the beginning, saying you carry out risk assessments or audits. Who asks for feedback on their performance as an auditor or an assessor at the end of the process? Excellent, full marks for those three of you. Try it. You might be surprised. Like I say, it can be a painful process. I am going to close there. We're obviously going to have a few moments for questions, I believe. I think we're running it very tight. Further discussion. I'm available at these addresses that are very blurry from where I am. And I think my KPI was pretty good. I had one person asleep who woke up halfway through. I had somebody twittering all the way through it. And I think I lost 2 but gained 1. So I think overall, I think it went quite well. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we've got time for probably a couple of questions. If anyone wants to ask a question of Tom. No? Okay, I've got one then.
Oh, there's one.
Oh, go on.
Hi. Just had a question. Last year I did a couple of audits, and a lot of the times the staff were bitching about each other, and they spent hours and hours saying about this guy doesn't do this and this person doesn't do that. Is that? Have you had that experience, or is that kind of semi-normal? Or
I wouldn't say it's fairly normal. I have had that experience, and I think that's part of actually trying to get under the skin of what's actually causing their problems. If they're bitching at each other, chances are if they're bitching at each other, they're in my opinion, and without sort of seeing the situation, they're probably frustrated by external factors that they can't deal with, and so they kind of turn on themselves, you know, injured animals, as it were, you know. So, and that's when you need to come in as that sort of mentor role as well, and try and pick apart what it is that's causing these problems, you know, because the more you, the more you're able to, again, empathise with them, the more they actually might tell you what the real problem is, rather than just, well, he didn't do this anyway, and he's crap at risk assessments, and I don't know why he's here in the first place, you know. Try and take it out of the playground and, you know, into the staff room a little bit more.
Any others? Yeah, I've just got one, Tom. It was interesting that I think you know, a lot of hackers will talk about social engineering techniques, and I thought it was really interesting to get a slightly different take on that and how those soft skills, you know, can really be a skill that, you know, we can all learn on. In your experience speaking to other assessors, how much do you think that's something that's understood, or do you think you understand that, but there's still a long way to go?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think that's one of the reasons why I put this together in this way. And I think there's an awful lot of people who go out and wave their ISO 27001 lead auditor piece of paper around and say, I'm an auditor, I can do this. And it's effectively, they are box ticking at the end of the day. And nothing necessarily wrong with that in the right place. My approach on this is that you get more. You get far more. You get a more holistic view of what it is that you're assessing. And also, with the standard, and if you just go in as a box ticker, the people on the other side of the table know what boxes you need to tick and will play that game against you, if you see what I mean. Whereas if you're looking at things from different areas, you're going to find out things that they might not necessarily want you to find out. You know, because as soon as you ask for the risk assessment, they'll slap the risk assessment down. As soon as you ask for this, they'll slap that down. Rather than actually, how do you do your risk assessments and watch them squirm, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There was one, sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you.
There was one more up there. And I can see Brian's itching to get on.
I found with the box ticking, most of the auditors that come and do that anyways, and it's the old saying of kittens don't fuck cats. And where you, as the techie, you know, usually can bullshit baffles brains.
Yes.
And you don't get a comeback from them, you know, when you do that. How do you get around it as an auditor?
By playing dumb. Sorry, I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me again? Sorry, that's what you said.
I thought you said no.
See, it worked, didn't it?
Yeah.
Look at that. Thank you.
Because most of them come from the finance services.
Yeah.
And as long as you can prove we've DR'd our finance system, this is the logins, you know, for the last sort of year on the finance system, they're usually happy and they don't really care about the rest, just ticking the rest of the boxes. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, and again, to reiterate, I think it's asking those dumb questions and saying, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you say that again in words of one syllable? I'm just a dumb auditor. You know, work with me here. You know, because unless I understand it, I can't write it up as a pass." Do you know what I mean? It's like I say, keep asking the questions at the maximum from the minimum. They'll give you the minimum with as many TLAs and as wrapped up in as much confusing bullshit as possible just to try and get you to move on. Whereas it's your job as an auditor or an assessor to really pick it apart. Let me get this straight. Are you saying X, Y, Z? No. Right, do it again. Try using a different word. You know, rather than, and an experienced auditor won't get put off with that, really. You know, they are. This is not me saying that all auditors are wrong and we have to do it this way. These are just separate sets of tools. An experienced auditor will pick up on that straight away. You know, they'll pick up on the fact that somebody's, you know, well, that somebody's waving their rectum at them to try and put them off. Does that answer? There was one at the back as well. Oh, sorry, Brian.
If it's very quick.
I'm enjoying this.
Eating into lunch.
One of the troubles I seem to have is anything that people find difficult, invariably falls under the banner of security, and you'll get to an audit and they'll throw absolutely anything they think you might be able to help with that. I can't find an acceptable way of saying, I'm not the bin, I'm not here to do everything that you can't be asked to do, basically.
You mean as an auditor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a challenging one. You're absolutely right. Part of that is identifying that scope in the first place and knowing what's going on. I'm kind of thinking that's probably more from an internal perspective, looking at internal teams. So the key to that is knowing the games that people play, understanding the environment that they're working in and therefore why they're pulling in everything else and making it your problem. And also trying to say, look, this isn't a security problem. I can write that up in the report, and if your reports are not being taken seriously, then change jobs, change companies, right? But and letting them go back with this report as leverage, and I used that term a couple of times in just recently, as leverage to say, look, this is not our problem. You know, you're making it my problem, and I'm trying to make it the auditor's problem. It's not our problem, it's yours, or it's Jeff's, or it's, you know, Marjorie in finances, or whatever. So it's, yeah, you're absolutely right, very challenging. It's trying to understand and pick out and understand that scope, your universe, as it were, in the first place.
So don't try and shut it down mid-audit, just reference it in the report.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, shutting it down is two ways. You want to shut it down because actually you really don't want to waste too much time on it. But if these are genuine grievances and they're getting in the way of them doing their security job, it needs to be addressed because it's taking time away.